and all these things, which is good. We had a conversation, we had a dialogue about what does the Republican Party look like in Brooklyn, in New York City, and especially for young people, because millennials are by far the largest voting bloc in U.S. history, and they're going to be very active, and I think Republican Party needs to do more outreach on that. The second thing I wanted to do was to outreach, diversify. So use words from Shermichael, both in our rhetoric and in reality. You know, both in our messaging and how we interact with different communities. And I wanted to bring in people who are normally don't think the Republican Party is not for them. And that was my goal. And I think we succeeded. We have a lot of diverse people here. And again, it's not mostly about playing identity politics. It's about tackling issues that are specific to specific communities. That's what that is. And one thing I say we do better, or we should be doing better than the Democrats and those on the left is, it's not about symbolic representation, it's about substantive transformations. And we need to start focusing on issues that matter the most, especially in an urban environment, in Brooklyn especially. The third thing is doing something that Republicans never do. I mean, I think they never do this, which is to show up. I wanted to show up. That is why we decided to go ahead and talk to different communities, whether it's independents, unaffiliated voters, young Republicans, and figure out what exactly are we doing wrong and what can we do to make your lives better. I had conversations with independents and unaffiliated who say, listen, if you just care about the community, I'm all for you. NYCHA is a disaster. NYCHA is a disaster and we need to fix it, and the Democrats are doing nothing about it. Maybe we need to do something about it. And, you know, we decided to put on a veterans breakfast to support veterans and give them appreciation back in November to say, hey, we hear you, Brooklyn veterans, we want to give you appreciation, here's a breakfast. Another thing we try to do is, for this holiday season, was to donate Pampers and baby bottles and things that mothers need in order to, you know, have a family. We provided those who unfortunately could not afford it. So we're doing these things, and it's different from the mainstream, what you see on TV and Fox News and all these other YRs around the city and other parts of the state. But I think we're doing something better. I think we're doing something unique, and I think we're doing something that hits home in the community. One thing, I'm glad we have the great speaker here. He worked under Ben Carson in HUD. He also is a contributor in CNN, MSNBC, on Fox News. He has his own podcast on Vox, correct? He has his own podcast on Vox. He is probably my favorite Republican, and this is me being biased, I'm sorry. And I'm glad to welcome here at the Brooklyn YR. He came over from DC, which is, thank you for that, for coming through. To give it up, everyone, for Shermichael Singleton.
Sponsors, the candidate who's running. This is definitely something that I enjoy doing. So as we sort of think about the state of our party, the state of politics in particular in our country, I'm going to start off by asking this question right now to all of you guys. And I just want to see by a show of hands. How many of you guys are concerned about the future of the Republican Party? Just raise your hands. That's every single person in this room. Now, we hear so often the old colloquialism, all politics is local, but what happens at the national level most certainly impacts our ability to target and engage with people at the local level. That is a fact, as you were talking about earlier. Most minorities, I would generally argue, would probably be more receptive to the message of conservatism. But what's the first thing you hear, whether it's the African-American community, Hispanic community, as of late the Asian community? You know, I like some of the policies, but I don't think you guys really care about it. I don't think you guys really care about the issues that impact my community. We have to begin to change that. The reality is the country is becoming more diverse. We know that all statistics, all data indicates that. In the next 10, 20 years maybe, 50+% of the country is going to be minority. You look at mobilization patterns to see where people are going. Cities are becoming more populous, more diverse. So now it's becoming, strategically speaking, more difficult to win a state, particularly at the presidential level, if you can't win 2 or 3 major cities in those states. So what does that mean for the Republican Party in 2024, in 2028? It means that we're facing a very similar paradigm shift that we saw during the 1930s, arguably, where Democrats, for the most part, reigned supreme. And I would argue that the future looks more bleak now than it did then, because I guess arguably with the era of Ronald Reagan, we really were able to turn things around. Is there going to be another Reagan that sort of helps us out of the desert 20 years from now? I'm not certain that that's going to be the case. Maybe, I hope, I'm hopeful, but I don't know. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves as Republicans, as conservatives, what are we trying to conserve? One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite philosophers, Sir Roger Scruton, who's now battling cancer. He's considered by many academics in conservative circles as being sort of the modern day Edmund Burke. One of his favorite sayings is, from what we have conserved, the question that conservatives have to ask, what can be reformed, what can be amended, and what can be thrown away? I think the question for us as younger conservatives is, from what we are inheriting from older conservatives, what of that we need to throw away? What if those things aren't working? What in those things have sort of made our ability to target this more diversifying nation, where culturally things are changing, what in those things we have seen over the past 10 years have made it more difficult for us, younger, more forward-thinking, more progressive? And by progressive, I don't mean in the liberal sense, but I mean accepting the idea and notion that modernity is an innate part of human nature. And in understanding all of those things, what can we continue to take with us as conservatives to preserve and conserve, but also reach those new communities? Those are questions that I think we're going to have to try and figure out in the era of Trump, which is not easy. And it's certainly not going to be easy once he leaves. One of the questions that I get all the time when I travel, when I speak, people say, you know, look, I get that you're a Republican, I get that you're a conservative, but why do you have to be one now with Trump in office? That's a question that I get all the time, and it's mostly from people of color. They will say, I actually have some conservative views. I'm fiscally conservative. Socially or culturally, I have some conservative views. I do believe in the importance of pragmatism and moderation. I do believe that we should sort of have some level of caution when we're creating great change, because we don't always know what the unintended consequences may be. All of those things that are sort of the bedrock of conservatism, philosophically speaking. Many people will say, I share those beliefs with you. But I look at your party, and I see measures of racism. I see from some of your speakers, and I won't name any specific names, that one ethno group is more dominant than another. How do you think that makes me feel? Yeah, the Democrats are horrible. They're not perfect, but I would rather go with what I perceive as a lesser of two evils. That's something we have to overcome. And I don't think, guys, if people realize just how near the edge we are as a party. Think about it. Hispanics, the fastest growing demo group in the country now. Guess what? 2018, about 7 to 10, overwhelmingly voted for a Democratic candidate for Congress over the Republican. You guys don't even need me to tell you what African Americans did. I think that's pretty clear. Asian Americans, a group that was sort of, split 50-50 almost, overwhelmingly voted for the Democrat over the Republican. We can't win this electoral game. Not on the road that we're currently traveling on. The mathematics, premier strategies can talk about this. The numbers just aren't there. And so the question for us as conservatives, as Republicans, has to be, how do we make what we're trying to offer to people palatable? And so if the question is, you're trying to conserve, what are you trying to conserve? What's the Republican answer to climate change? What's the Republican answer to immigration? What's the Republican answer to student debt? We need to be at the forefront of every single one of those issues so that we're presenting to people a logical, a substantive alternative. But guess what? Democrats are winning every single message. So if you're younger, you view the world a little differently, you look at Republicans and you say, well, what is there to offer me? We haven't given them that. That burden falls on us. Michael Oakeshott, again, another one of my favorite conservative philosophers, although he's more under the libertarian camp, said that as a conservative, I shouldn't indiscriminately force my views upon you. And then he went on to write, but the burden on any individual who is attempting to convince me of something is on you to convince me of that thing. We haven't been effective at doing that. And it's become more difficult, more challenging in the era of Trump. Now look, I have a lot of friends who supported the president, who support the president, who work in the White House, who are part of his re-election campaign. And I respect their right to do so. But I'm looking beyond today. Keep in mind, presidents come to go. They don't come to stay forever. And so whatever baggage they leave once they're gone, guess who has to clean it up? Us. Whatever that stench may be, however people may be offended by the temperament that was left behind, it's upon us to clean it. It's upon us to fix it. And so it's more important now, I would argue, than any other time in modern history, at least in our party, with the exception of perhaps the years of Barry Goldwater, to say this is who we are. These are the things that define us. This is what we believe. This is how conservatism in a modern, more 21st century, more forward-thinking society meets the needs to your problems, in spite of all of the craziness you see, in my opinion, coming from the White House. We have to do that. That burden is on us. If we don't do it, then we will find ourselves, as our party did 60, 70 years ago, in a 40-year period of wilderness. We know how we got here. I would argue we still have an opportunity to fix it. If you look at a lot of data right now, minorities aren't necessarily tied to the Democratic Party. You guys may remember in 2016, one of Hillary Clinton's biggest issues was with a group called Black Lives Matter. And they said, well, why in the hell should black people keep voting for Democrats when we really haven't seen anything for the vote? So that tells me that there's opportunity for us as conservatives to make the case to these diverse people. Younger voters. You're a young college student graduating with $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt. You're working your ass off. And then someone comes and tells you, well, you know what? You went to college and yeah, you kicked your ass off for 4 years. You went to get a master's degree for 2 years. And sorry, but everybody else behind you, we're just going to make it free for them. Wouldn't you be pissed? I think most people would be. What is our argument to those people? Guys, there is something inherently important in conservatism. Something that I would argue is an inherent feature of human nature, generally speaking. You know what that is? Community, love of family, faith, hard work, determination. Those are things that, at least in our society, I would argue, are inherent in all of us. And those things are the bedrock of who we are as conservatives. So how do we pull those things out of people and help them realize those things and actualize that via our policies? We can do that. We should be doing that. But before you can even get to that point, people can't perceive you as racist. They can't perceive you as sexist, xenophobic. Those are the barriers. Before we can talk about message, Jack Kemp said, it doesn't matter how great your policies are, if people don't believe you care about them first, guess what? They close the door. Yeah, your ideas may be better, but what about the racist stuff? What about the guy in Iowa? Hell, what about the guy in the White House? I hear you, but what about those folks? We have to make a distinction between the negatives within our party and those of us who I would argue, such as yourselves, who are trying to move the party forward. We should be at the forefront of every single major issue in this country. We cannot be reactionary. We can't be. Edmund Burke said, you reform in order to conserve. It's the founding father of Western conservatism. What he was essentially saying when he wrote that quote about the French Revolution is that if you are going to preserve certain aspects about your culture, about your customs of behavior, about the things that are important to who you are, you must adapt. You have to. Hell, biology tells us if you don't, what happens? You become extinct. We have to begin to think in that mindset as we look at this changing landscape in our country, or we are going to have a very, very difficult time, electorally speaking, moving forward. That burden is on us. People are interested in what we have to offer. I can guarantee you, if you go to anybody who's voted Democrat and ask them, hey, are you satisfied with your party? Most people might say, generally, I mean, they're okay, but I don't really have an alternative. We have to be the alternative. I'm not saying that we have to win 50+%. Mathematically, that should be the objective. But we should win 25%, 30% of every single demo group in this country because we have to remain competitive. Right now, we're not. So the question that I guess I will leave you guys as we enjoy the rest of this night is this. Who do we want to be? How do you want this party to define who you are? And ultimately, as you think about that, how do you want it to define the country? At the end of the day, it's all up to the individual. Because the society we have, the government we have will be no more or no less than what we make as individuals. And then we come together to make that great collective. That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And I think we can do it. I have hope. I believe in us. You guys wouldn't be here if that was the case. Obviously, you guys care about those things. We have to put forth the work, ladies and gentlemen, to get to where we want to be. If anybody's going to define this party, it should be us. Not folks of the past, but folks of the future. Thank you. Woo!
Encore. Yep. One more time. One time.
Give him back the microphone.
I don't hear from me. Shermichael, you make me want to go on petition right now. Like, start knocking on doors right now. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and we're trying to drive a conversation, especially going to 2020. We're trying to push something that is going to be very different than what you see in a lot of YR groups and a lot of Republican groups. It's going to be very different, more community-oriented. If you want to know more about that, stay tuned. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brooklyn YR, at Brooklyn YR. Follow us, go to our website, www.brooklynYR.com, and you're going to find out everything there is to know in 2020 on January 2nd, because I'm going to be drunk on January 1st. So January 2nd, so stay tuned for that. Everyone, we have an award to give out in the next probably 30 minutes, so everyone continue drinking, continue having a good time. Shermichael, I know if you all right, cool, we'll take some pictures with the board, and everyone come up here as part of the Brooklyn YRs to come up and take a picture. And yeah, DJ, throw that music back on.